Right, hey, thanks everyone. Hopefully lots of you disagree with what I say, and that way I'll have a really fun conversation for the rest of the event. But how many of you here have done some form of self-hosting in the past? Quite a lot of you. Great, because you're all going to be really annoyed with me by the end of the session with any luck. Right, because ultimately today, is it really worth it? So what we're going to look at is a few considerations. Like, who are we actually doing this for? Am I doing it for me? Am I doing it for my family? Am I doing it for some organization? And then what am I attempting to self-host? Because there's so many things we can run within our house, within our data centers, within a range of environments. And sometimes, why am I even attempting to do this? There will be yaks involved. Don't worry, we'll come back to that later. And how do I do this without spending a lot of money, losing my mind, annoying my family, maybe looking for a new job, whatever the context may be, because we're going to look through this through a few lenses. So what really is self-hosting? This was actually taken from Wikipedia, and it really made me laugh because I'm never going to really try and host my own primary NTP node. That's not really of interest to me. Mainly, most people tend to do things like email, maybe file serving, a few other things. But when I'm going to look at this through a range of lenses, not just for self-hosting, for me as an individual, but also through a range of personas. Because quite often today, when we first come in, this is my 20th of these conferences, right? That's a long period of time. When I started this, there wasn't the family. I was mostly doing this for myself. I've been self-hosting for over 20 years. But today I've got to consider not just my daughter, but now my grandkids. That's scary. But I also have to consider my parents and other extended members of the family. So it's a much broader context. But many of us here might be looking after small organizations. They're trying to run these things in-house. They've got concerns about data security and privacy. And also, in my day job, I'm often dealing with really large organizations. And many of them today are worried about where they keep their data. They're worried about how they secure it. They're looking at moving more things in-house. So we're going to look at a few of these things through more than one lens, because self-hosting means different things to different people. One thing I'm going to avoid is this thing called WAF. It was an old term we used years ago, particularly in the home theater space, the wife acceptance factor. Right, you may snigger, it's very inappropriate now, but it was a really big deal. And this is taken from a document we used to have when guests came over, so they knew how to operate the TV. Right, this was normal, because the remote I used, which was the programmable one, no one else in the house could understand. It was easier just to say, there's 3 remote controls. Press this button to do X. But today I think we need to think about the family acceptance factor, FAF. Don't faff around, look after your family, right? And we have all these personas in your family. Some of them have almost no technical skills. I'm still amazed my mother knows how to send an email. We have a range of devices. I can't control that. Some of them even try and use Windows in my house. I'm shocked. I'm just blown away. But, iPhones, iPads, Android devices, and I really, with many members of our extended family, assume their device is compromised before they even enter my house. There's a broad range of social media platforms. We thought we were doing well. We got my mother to use Facebook so she could see family photos. My daughter will only post on Instagram. So you can't dictate these things, and we're generating a vast amount of content. And I want to look after this because I want all the photos of my grandkids. These are important things to me. So I'm going to skip around a bit because I want to cover some of the how early, because we had this dream. We're going to self-host. We're going to buy a little NUC. Maybe I've got this old device. Maybe I'm going to use a Raspberry Pi and it's going to be neat and tidy. And what you actually end up with, we know this. We've got these machines and these cables spilling out. Often when you want to start, think about what you have that's spare. Today, so many of us cycle through laptops. What you do with that old laptop that's not suitable for another member of the family, it's got a hard drive, it's got a decent amount of storage, it's often got a decent amount of RAM. It's often a great place to prototype, and it's relatively low power. I'll keep coming back to power. Because when you start self-hosting, your power bill can change exponentially. Your network's critical. Start with a clean environment. How many of you have fiber to the home? Isn't it wonderful? That's a Chorus ONT, and that's a typical requirement. Any new home in New Zealand now has to have one of those distribution boxes. This is actually my daughter's house. There's nothing plugged in right now. We haven't started on her network. But cabling can be a nightmare. Having to recable your home in order to support your networking requirements is a nightmare. Even recabling business enterprises. I've talked to people who look after a number of small, medium businesses, and literally I'm seeing them string cables around the outside of buildings because it's easier than trying to go room to room around the offices. So cabling's crucial. I'll come back to this one later because this is a really useful picture. And there's never enough cables. And this was really cool because it turns out the house I was renting for a while had a ton of cables. Awesome. None of them were labeled. Nightmare. But there was lots of cables. Right. There's some technologies we're going to skip through during this session. And you may be surprised at a couple of the entries here, but to me, some of them are really, really crucial. When you get into self-hosting, there's a lot of other things you could be doing. And I've talked to many of you already today, going, oh, I want to try this and I want to install that. But one that, to me, the bedrock's crucial. And then you can go and play with a lot of stuff. And hopefully throw some of it away. Otherwise, you do an audit and you suddenly discover you've got hundreds of different weird apps doing the same thing because you never bothered turning them off. But look at the why. Why am I doing this? And I've got a mate right now, and he's looking at a big self-hosting project because of cost. He thinks he's paying too much for his email, for his web hosting, a bunch of other things he does. I've looked at what he's planning. His recovery will take him at least 5 years just for his hardware expenditure. So the cost aspect of self-hosting can be a fallacy. So just be careful about why you're doing it. Security posture, what do I want to share? To me, that's really important these days. And crucially, smart devices often share an awful lot more about us than we expect. This is a really big deal, and there's actually lawsuits and things happening around this. One of the examples here is actually TCL. Their TVs in a number of jurisdictions share a ridiculous amount of data. LG got done, a bunch of other big manufacturers have had issues. And then there's the data I don't want to share. I really don't want to share my health data. So why not let the health platform share it for you? If this hasn't made the press here in Australia, I'm shocked. This was huge. Hundreds of thousands of people affected. All their records from their doctors, all their information was lifted. And this is one of a series of medical-centric hacks that have happened recently. So, and then there's the legal access. Because of the Cloud Act, if you use a US-owned hyperscaler, your data is available to the US government if they ask for it, and you don't have to be told. Turns out we put one of New Zealand's big identity platforms for government in a cloud service in Australia. So guess what? All identity data is freely available to the US. Interestingly, this Cloud Act is embargoed in New Zealand. There are a lot of questions being asked right now because the American hyperscalers are building out data centers in New Zealand. Will these rules apply or not? The hyperscalers say yes. Our government currently says no. We'll see how that plays out. But as this was on Australian soil, it applies, even though it's New Zealand data. This is crazy. Be careful where you put your data. So for myself personally, I don't want my banking data, I don't want my health data. There are a range of things I don't want going anywhere near a hyperscaler. There is the why, because I can. Oh, I want to try this thing out, I want to play with this thing. In fact, one of the examples I'll use here is along those lines. And there was a considerable amount of yak shaving involved in that project. Oh, come on, anybody here don't know what yak shaving is? Please, look it up, please. You've got to... You are doing it. You live in an IT world. Odds on at some point you've shaved a yak. And the big trap is definitely beware of yaks. Because if you're shaving a yak as a hobby, that's great. But once you're doing it professionally, you've got to do it with a bit of style. You have the right type of razor. You know, you've really got to produce a great outcome. But don't try and shave yaks at large scale. In an enterprise, they're going to have a committee meeting about are we using the right razor and who's responsible for the right yak and are we actually meeting our health and safety requirements. And you might say, well, that's fine. because we now live in this AI world. And guess what? What we'll do is we'll just go and ask AI how to build this thing for us. Yaks will not be involved. Guess what happens? This was the first example I got of give me a picture of a yak being shaved. Oh my God. I had to tweak the prompts to improve on this, but I had to save the picture, right? So just be careful where you go, because there are consequences. So, yeah, we've got big implications around privacy and security here in the region. I deal with it a lot in my day job. Across the whole region, and there are so many nuances. You know, parts of Asia actually now trust China more than they trust the US. They're more willing to adopt Chinese technology than US technology. There's amazing strict controls in India, even to the point where I can't have data move to a different state in India. Right? Data controls can be at that level. There are some similar controls here in Australia around what data can't move between states. And that's on top of all the rules that we face dealing with Europe and GDPR and everything else. So we have all those security issues. The cost of cloud hosting is really shifting everything. We're seeing a lot more transitions back to on-prem from large organizations and even small companies reconsidering how they use and consume cloud. Private AI platforms are appearing because of the cost of putting that data in the cloud, or they don't want to share that data. Again, privacy, security concerns, but there's still that big investment. But I'm personally hearing of a lot more around the small to medium business market, where particularly with the changes VMware's imposed around their pricing, looking at how they run their services, a lot of these things end up going to cloud-based or SaaS-based offerings. And personally, when we look at this, sometimes when we look at the cost, maybe we might be better buying a service that we trust than trying to run a service because of the complications. And that'll kind of come out when we look at some of the technologies we're going to dig into. Like, where do we begin? And personally, the first consideration should be your domain. Regardless of whether this is a business organization of scale or you're doing it personally. Having your domain gives you the independence. Having a domain means you can control your email, you can place it where you want. But don't run your domain hosting yourself. That's just a step too far. Like, large-scale organizations don't host their domains themselves anymore. I mean, I remember doing this 25 years ago. Companies were self-hosting their domain records. No, don't do that. Find a reliable hoster. But there's tips within all of this. If you are doing this for yourself, for your family, don't buy too many domains. I'm saving like $300 a year because I got rid of a few recently. I've got friends who own 30 or 40 domains. They've got them registered for all their children and extended family instead of having a family domain, right? Domains cost money and time, but don't host too many domains. But if you're a small business, oh my God, I still see people who send me an invoice with, you know, your local Sparky at extra.co.nz. Extra's shutting down its email service completely. You've got to go somewhere else. Lots of small companies still use Google, Hotmail, Yahoo, you name it, you see it. It's a crucial part of your identity. Own a domain, it's not difficult. Own a couple, maybe. But if you're a large organization, God, you've got to own all the domains. You've got to own all the typos. You've got to own your product names. And if you don't register your domains, well, there's consequences. This is real. One of the guys involved with South Park noticed what was going to happen, so he domain squatted on the new Kennedy Center domain names and bought them all. That's a big deal for a company, and we've seen weird consequences. Even a sniff of a new product launch and someone's got in there ahead of you and gone and done some domain squatting. Email, use your domain, that's why you have it. But have a backup address and then have a backup for your backup. And there's reasons, because you need to recover it at some point. You need someone to send the bill. The last thing you want to do is have the bill go to the address that is on the domain. Right? And it's amazing how many people do this. And what can we do? We could self-host, we could go to a boutique provider. Great to see Fastmail here. Awesome, brilliant organization. There's others that get talked about a lot. Some ISPs still offer services, some hosting providers. And that's one way you can kind of guarantee things aren't living inside the hyperscalers. Many people use those offerings from Google and Microsoft to host their email domain. But first and foremost, use your domain, have your email. If you're going to self-host, what you're going to do, well, I've done the bespoke thing for years. I've had a Linux host. I didn't use SendMail. I'm not that crazy, right? Please, I have my moments, but no. And I'll come back to that later. But it's got more complicated. In the early days, it was just like, oh, I need some anti-spam antivirus, or maybe I'll do some webmail. Now I need to do SPF, DKIM, DMA. Oh, and now I've got to have Let's Encrypt because I want to do remote access with IMAP. And it becomes more complicated. Now there's some great approaches. Stalwart is a real simple way of spinning up a fully featured IMAP, POP, you name it, handles encryption, Let's Encrypt, everything's there. Docker Mail Server is another example, MailCow's another, there's a bunch out there. So there's some nice ways, again, if I'm starting from scratch, I'm not going to build a bespoke solution. I'm lucky, I automated it. I wrote it all in Ansible. I can go and redeploy it again. But I may not use it for much longer because I'm thinking I'll go down the appliance approach. So family emails, again, we've got to have a large range of devices. We've got to look after that FAF aspect, but access from everywhere. Gone are the days where I would only need to access my family email in the house. I need to be able to access it while I'm here at an event. And the device support. Small businesses, well, Exchange was everywhere. Hosted email is a big deal. Lots of organizations here and in New Zealand have offered hosted email to small businesses for years. GApps for Business. For many of them, I've got to be honest, as a service offerings, you're just too small to run these services. And I don't know how bad things are in Australia. Well, what the normal size of a small business is in Australia, but like the average size of a business in New Zealand is about 3 employees. When you're operating at that scale, do you need the overhead, the IT overhead? So think about it. But large organizations, so many of them have gone to this outsource model now, particularly the ones with committed spend contracts with Microsoft or Google or whoever. It's just, and they need all those features. They don't just email, they want calendar, they want instant messaging. They want control over how it's being managed on remote devices. And it's a real shame because we had some great solutions in these enterprises and most of them now are going to the cloud and going to these commercial offerings. So, and one thing I keep coming back to, be careful about taking what you use at work and bringing it home and vice versa. Just because you run this thing at home, it's really hard to super scale it. Platforms like Dovecot and etc. will scale. They do scale. But you've got to really know the nuances of how you're doing it. So some key things. Use a different email for your billing contract. Have backups. And then consider the where and how. Have a different renewal date for your different domains, because if your reminder for your bill goes to this domain and it expires on the same date as this, yeah, game over. It's not too good. But be careful on your technology. Yeah, you use Exchange at work, but does your family need a full Active Directory and Exchange cluster just so they can read their emails at home? Possibly not. If you run SendMail at home, and I've spoken to someone already today who does that, well, great. Your lack of spare time is your problem, not mine. That's great. Photos. For me, we've got so many photos. My daughter literally can't stop taking photos, and we love them. They're awesome. There's lots of really great options now for hosting photos. I've talked to a few people. Image is really popular. I'm running Photo Prism. I'm actually thinking of going back to Image. You know, storing those things locally has become a lot easier. You could run it on a NAS appliance. You run it on your own host. Those provider options, getting photos out is becoming a lot harder. Hosting services, looking outside the mainstream. There's a whole bunch of others, just some simple examples. It's amazing people who host all their family photos on Flickr. Why? I don't anyway. And then if you're really into it, things like SmugMug, maybe you're really into photography, you want to sell some of these things, this is great. But also I've got to know people who every single photo they ever share or want to hang on to, it lives in social media. And that has aspects again on privacy and rights. Because the moment you upload it, it's not just your photo anymore. And again, where are you going to need to access this? For me, I kind of took the easy way out for some stuff. A Google One account just made my life easier to make sure no photos got deleted from our family, and we could share them quickly. But crucially, I make sure I can get them back out of Google. I have an offline backup. It's really hard to detach yourself from that one with an extended family. So we have regular sync from mobile phones. I've got all digital photos, scanned, lots of stuff. Crucially, syncing's got a lot harder. I think I'll come back to that later. But most importantly, regular offsite backups. My backups have backups. There's random hard drives that are encrypted living in other buildings because I don't want to lose those photos. Photo Prison didn't quite have the ease of use I hoped for, so it's not kind of used by everyone. I'm going to maybe look at image. Sync from Google Photos used to be relatively easy. Google changed stuff, so now a lot of the common sync tools are really hard for Google Drive and Google Photos offline sync. So hopefully we resolve that in the near future with some of those tools. So right now it's a bit more of a manual process. You know, give me a dump from these dates. It's frustrating. It's just annoying. Media. Hosting media at home is really common. One of the reasons many of us have NAS-type devices. And it's not just audio. Yes, we've got thousands of CDs that now live on the server, old DVDs, family videos, particularly stuff my parents used to have that's come off DV, various platforms, not just phones. Critical documents that I do not want to live in a Google Drive, I host at home. Because the moment it's in my personal Google Drive, it's being analyzed. Unless you've got a commercial contract, your data is their data to analyze. I don't want that. And all these photos. Crucially is how I access it. For audio playback, file access, remote access, security, these are all big considerations. And again, back up all the things. So I run a NAS-type file server. I used to do this as a DIY, kind of Linux environment, Samba, NFS, some web services. I now use currently TrueNAS with ZFS storage. I didn't want to do a commercial NAS. I wanted something I could kind of build up. And I went from a scrappy old case to recently a really nice fractal define R5. These are gorgeous. Lots of hard drive capacity, really easy to play with. But there's lots of options. People use PropMox, Open Media Vault, Unraid, other platforms. So you choose the one that kind of makes sense to you. My focus was storage first, but I can still do other things with that. I run containers to do a lot of the services I want on it. It has Samba and NFS, but anything external, you VPN to my house, right? I'm not exposing this on a port, just in case. I want very strict controls. And again, it's got those regular backups, regular offsite syncs, and so on. IoT. How many people play with IoT in the room? Yeah. How many people have an IoT-specific VLAN on their network? Yeah, see? Right, because some of this stuff's really bad, as we've seen earlier. And there's so many platforms, it's a minefield, right? Minefield of security, compatibility. Matter's hopefully going to cause a bit of a shift, making it much easier for things to interoperate. Toya, who's heard of Toya? If you don't know about it, if you buy cheap IoT devices, it's probably their platform. If you've got something that's Grid Connect, Arlec, Brilliant, a whole range of devices, don't install their app, install the Toya one. You may as well, because you just need one app. It will see every vendor device you can think of. Because guess what? All those devices, phone home to China. Yay! Toya used to be really nicely hackable, which I'll get to shortly. Alternative firmwares. So all my early Toya devices, I could basically reflash the firmware. There was a man-in-the-middle attack, and you could basically put TASModa or ESP Home on. They're great alternative firmwares. They give me a lot of control over those devices. So 90% of my IT devices are open source firmware. And even then, most of them still live on an IoT network. So I have a separate VLAN. There's some DIY hardware. I actually use ESP8266 for some old stuff. Nearly everything now is ESP32. And what do you use as your home automation platform? Well, my plugs are either ESP Home or TASModa. These are the Atom ones. These are awesome. They're actually certified for Australia. All the slides will be available later. But Atom plugs are fully reflashable, open firmware compatible. They even support up to 16 amps, power monitoring. Some of the newer Xiaomi temperature humidity detectors actually now have alternative firmwares. This ATC me thermometer Firmware is awesome, gives you extra features, lower battery use. Even my little IR Blaster Puck runs ESP Home. So where possible, everything is open. Highly recommend it, right? Or isolate the hell out of it. Everything kind of feeds into Home Assistant, a Mosquito for MQTT, and lots of really nice automation, and just keep trying to build on it. So you choose what suits you. There's some great platforms for home automation today. AI. Anyone tried self-hosting AI? How's your power bill? Right? It'll cost you a lot. I decided to play with some stuff recently and see what I could do on the cheap. Enterprises, it can be critical. I know companies hosting big platforms because of the data footprint that they really don't want to put in the cloud. And data and AI, I/O, all these things kind of go together. But if you're using a free service, ultimately you are a product, you're training it. You might be using one of these services to play with your own images, and ultimately you're giving away a lot of rights the moment you do that. So just be careful. Some of the AI tools, a couple of ones I'm using, are really, really great for restoring old photographs. They're incredibly powerful. They've got really, really amazing retouching capability beyond anything we would normally see in a free domain. But why self-host? Well, one of the things is around home automation. There's some really cool add-ons now. So the things I've been playing with is, can I ultimately plug this into things like Home Assistant, do voice recognition, do smarter home automation, but again, have it self-hosted. The private voice services piece is quite interesting at the moment. A lot around using things like ESP32 type devices with microphones to build your own equivalents to platforms like Alexa. But it can be cheap. One thing I tried out was trying to use an integrated GPU in my server to run some workloads. And there's some older discrete GPUs that are actually quite cost effective, but this was cool. You're playing with some simple AI image generation code. There's Confau UI and Forge and a few others. I was 3 times faster on the integrated GPU than running every single core in my CPUs. 3 times faster, using a service I'm not otherwise using. It was 20 degrees cooler when it was running. No, 10 degrees cooler, 20 watts less power. 3 times faster, 20 watts less power by using the GPU that was otherwise unused. And for me, I hate unused resources. So this is a win-win-win. So now I can let my server do all the heavy lifting, all the other stuff, run my VMs, but my little AI jobs now run on that GPU that otherwise is asleep. I'm lucky I've got a motherboard where I can allocate 16 gig of RAM to the GPU. So I can actually handle some quite large models, even though it's relatively underpowered. I also played with a real discrete server-grade GPU and nearly melted my server, but that's a separate problem for another story. But this was cool. Worked. But when you're self-hosting, we go through a journey, and I actually started with things like Red Hat 7, not RHEL, Red Hat 7, on an old PC that came courtesy of work, with some basic email, some basic file access. At one point, we actually had it running as a thin client for some Linux environments. And then it became a generic kind of homebrew server, various flavors of Linux, RAID storage, virtual machines. I've talked years ago about Track. I still use Track as my ticketing, task tracking platform. I love it, but it's got SVN, Git, WordPress. I was doing DLNA for media hosting. And now I've got this big beastie box with ZFS storage and a lot of RAM. I'm thinking of selling the RAM because it's worth more now than ever before. It's like gold. But no, I need all that RAM because I went to play with some AI models and they ate 96 gig of RAM. But now I run a lot more things in containers. In fact, I started, even though I'd Ansibled the heck out of everything, I started to re-platform an awful lot of things I had in VMs into containers. It just became easier. So I've got lots and lots of services, but crucially, I have a really power-efficient PSU. This box now runs about $50, $60 a year less in power than the box it replaced, even though it's got more infrastructure in it. When you start self-hosting, power is a big deal. So, and what else do I have? Well, still got a Myth TV server. I run a open source based router, get to that in a minute, some Myth clients, some Raspberry Pis as media players, and my IoT devices. So there's a whole, and that's just a hint of the devices around the house. I think my lookup table on the router has close to 200 and something entries for static IPs now. And it's crazy, because it just keeps, and the fact is this can keep up. Like this R7000 runs currently Fresh Tomato. I mean, I started off using IPCOP, looked at other firewall platforms, but I really love an appliance approach for my firewall. There's still some great hardware knocking around secondhand, but it's more than powerful enough with the ARM processors to run. This is running, what, 5 VLANs, WireGuard, ad protection, and ultimately really low power consumption. And I can just power cycle it. I never have to worry about it. It's ultra reliable. My network, good wired networking is crucial. Anyone notice something about this photograph? 2 colors, blue cables, great. Network cable, beige cable, phone cable, no, Cat5e. All the phone jacks in the house were wired with Cat5e. So I just swapped the jacks. So I didn't have to rewire the house. So double check what your wiring is, otherwise use your phone cable to pull through real cable. It's made my life a lot easier, so I can hardwire everything. That is a huge win. The VLAN isolation for me is crucial. I have my main LAN, a lab LAN, IoT LAN, media LAN, and crucially, because I don't trust other people's machines, a guest LAN that can't see anything. It's allowed out, with still some security around it. And then fibers to the home, I adore. I can get this upgraded. I think right now Chorus will support to about 8 gig in if I want at home. That means upgrading a lot of other things. I think, like the most common thing we're seeing right now in the home lab space is people jumping up to about 2.5 gig. That's relatively cost effective, and most networking will handle it, but the moment you start jumping up higher to things like 10, you're probably looking at Cat6 cabling and Cat6A and all the rest of it, and it starts getting expensive. I have colleagues that have got like 40 or 100 gigabit networking in their lab, but they are also running a rack. I have a machine sitting under the stairs for most of what I do, right? Because I want to keep it neat and tidy, and my wife's much happier when I do that. And it also keeps all the laundry very dry. So overall, my guidance, right? Think about your time. Your time is actually money. It really is. And many of us don't think that way. Not everything scales up or down. Just because it works at home, don't necessarily try it at work. Though I've used a lot of lab-type technologies to build out prototypes and things at work. Many years ago, we were prototyping a capability and we needed an isolated DNS. So I just used DNS mask. I love DNS mask. It's on all your routers. It just works. And someone turned up and tried to replace it with bind. Why? Why would you do that to me? No. SendMail. Yeah, if you run SendMail at home, that's your problem, not mine. Great. Automation. Like most of what I've done, I can move between flavors of Linux. I can redeploy it really quickly. But I love containerization today because that separation of the application and the data and the configuration makes backups, upgrades, everything really easy. I'm on my home assistant environment, or my media sharing, all these things just run as containers, and I can upgrade them, tweak them, just works. Providing you get the network right. Network can still be a problem. DLNA and containerized networking don't usually get on. That's a world of pain. If you want some tips, catch me later. Firewall and network, get those right. Get your VLANs in there. Back up everything all the time, regularly. I've had power spikes that have blown out my UPS and the PSU in the server, right? They've got that bad, and that's always a fun thing to recover from. We had one spike that blew out the capacitors on my Myth TV motherboard. And trying to buy an old motherboard compatible with my RAM and my CPU. Anyway, and just because it worked for you, just be careful. We know this meme. But always think, why do I want to provide 24/7 support to my entire family? Honestly, I've had to remote in from Portland through my house to my mother-in-law's house in Brisbane to fix the router she's talking to that I'm going into her house through because of problems. That's the sort of expectation you suddenly start getting off your family. Yeah, so always think about the why. The why is crucial. And then, well, have fun. Just generate lots of AI pictures of cats. Because, that's what the internet exists for. And this is really special to us because this is in remembrance of our old cat, Champers, who was a champagne. This so looks like Champers. It's scary. But, I won't show you the really bad examples that it came up with. It's amazing what AI can do to your prompts. And these were all self-hosted, not run in Grok or Cloud or anywhere else. So that's part of my journey, a little bit of advice. Some of you are going to disagree with, look, I'm going to have a fun conversation. But I'm open to questions because there's a lot of things I've got wrong. I just didn't think I had time to talk about all of them. So please ask a question. Otherwise, I'm here all week.
Yeah. But first, we need to have a discussion about these upgrades you were talking about.
I also self-host a lot of things. My biggest headache is what happens if I fall under a bus? What happens to the email accounts that all my family uses, what's going to happen next?
Actually, that's the one thing I didn't put on the documentation. Oh, yeah. So there's a list. Well, everything's in my track server. As long as the track server's alive, you're okay. Oh, yeah, if that goes down, we're really stuck. Now, having to print out every so often of these are the companies you're using for hosting. You put it with all the other good things that you've got. And we all know, like today, if you lose a relative, if something happens, extricating their data and everything from the social media platforms is a real nightmare. So thank you, Peter, for bringing that one up. I should have included more on that. But yeah, documenting this stuff is crucial.
So redundancy. I self-host more things than I should, and recently had a power failure and have lost, I think, just the system disk on my NAS. But that's a huge pain. And I'm looking at all the other things I host and what would happen if I lost, a hypervisor that is running all of the containers or VMs. Yeah. You're doing everything on one single box for 20-something years and haven't had an issue, or have had one issue once?
A lot.
I wouldn't use the word simple.
So everything I have I can recover really quickly because I've had to at some point. Any of you have been to previous war stories on crazy, stupid things that can happen to your storage? No, I'm very careful about what I'm storing and how. One thing I like about something like the TrueNAS setup I've got is this one meta file needs to be backed up, and then because it's like an appliance, I can bring it back really quickly. So a bunch of things I operate today are appliance-based or container-based, and I need to back up very little data to fully rebuild it. As long as I can bring up a copy of my Ansible code, which is all in Git in multiple places, I can recover everything incredibly quickly. So taking a look at separation between configuration as code and configuration and data, making sure data is backed up reliably, appliance type approach.
So no hardware redundancy?
I don't have any hardware redundancy, no, but I actually made a choice this time around to buy much better grade of hardware than I would have in the past. All right? And I've been very lucky. A lot of our kit's been based off motherboards we used to use to test Smith TV and other things. Some of these motherboards finally gave up after nearly 15 years. They were incredibly resilient, but then I've had other motherboards die. It's ridiculous. So resilience is good. I've never I know a few people have tried to do things like build redundant clusters using multiple Raspberry Pis or whatever, but you end up actually building extra complexity. So I've looked at a platform I can recover really quickly, and also something that if the house goes, there's a hard drive somewhere else, and I can recover everything. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for your talk, Steve. So what do you think about the those networking over power things, like where you hook, like, because some people maybe can't rewire their house or whatever. Can you recommend some stuff in that space?
So there's a few I've looked at, because there's one point in the house we're in right now where I could do with feeding some stuff back to somewhere else. That there's only one phone jack, not multiple. And because Chorus in New Zealand love putting a fiber endpoint in the wrong part of the house, right? There's a couple of options today. One is actually to run it over coax. There's these coax adapters, so you can, if you've got like spare old runs for TV cable, you can actually go and run anything up to gigabit over these coax, like the old school Ethernet. The electric power over the Ethernet over power adapters have got a lot better, but some of them in some houses don't quite work. Particularly, I've heard of issues with the way RCDs are put into the switchboard. You're on a different circuit, and it's not always working. I've also heard of issues where someone's managed to get into the neighbour's house. Yeah, and other weird situations, but I know they've gotten a lot better. But running a hard cable's your friend if you want to do, but it's hard, yeah. Do your research.
Just a quick addendum to answer to Peter's question. Yes, make sure you've got your information on a paper document. Make sure it's in plain English, and make sure you tell your partner where it lives, just in case you do get hit by a bus.
I wanted to ask about the networking stuff. That's all a bit new to me, and yeah, I love sort of the self-hosting side, but as far as like buying routers or whatever, when you sort of just kind of half get forced to use the ISP router sometimes. What are a good place to start with that whole stack?
Yeah, the ISP routers are a problem. Like, I still have an original one ISP has, so if there's a real problem, I've had some really weird ones where, because of the firewall the DIA operate out of New Zealand that does deep packet inspections, every so often someone's been naughty and a big chunk of the internet disappears and they say it's my fault. Well, no, it's not. It's not my router. You've got to be able to stick the original router back in is useful. But if you've got something that will just support the authentication that your internet provider has, you can often swap another device in. I prefer having open devices. There's lots of things that support open firmwares now. Otherwise, you can look at bridge mode, where you effectively push the IP to your real device, and the ISP device isn't really running a firewall. It isn't really doing any heavy lifting. Looking at things like, but I'm starting to see now apparently some of the ISP devices support guest VLANs. It's not unusual. Some of them now support multiple VLANs. Some of the devices, some of the ISPs provide even run OpenWRT or likewise under the hood. So, try your luck. There's a ASUS equivalent to the R7000 that's awesome because it's impossible to brick. I kid you not. If it gets really, really grouchy, it goes back to a default web mode where you can just push a firmware to it. So if you accidentally do something, you can always recover it. It's unbrickable, which is like unheard of for these devices. Whereas this, you can really brick. And that's why I have a backup of one, which is this ASUS device, and it's awesome, right? So, and then the rest of it comes down to cabling, getting the cabling right.
Right. Okay, well, Steve's going to be around for the rest of the week, and he hates talking about these sorts of things, but if you're really nice to him, he might have a conversation with you about it. And in the meantime, darling, this is a lovely little gift for you from the organisers. Everyone, thanks, Steve.